Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Cassidy. I will try to live up to it as best I can. Yeah, and I really appreciate being here with you all today. As Senator Sullivan said, so much energy, so much going on in this area of Alaska, and there's really a can-do attitude. So I've got a fair amount of slides and data to cover here, so I'm going to mostly kind of refer to my notes so I don't miss any insights that I am here to share with you. And also on some of the tables, I've left a few hard copies of the report that also says a lot of what I'm going to cover here today. If you need a PDF copy, you can reach out to Cassidy or Katie or Aubrey for that. So let's dive in. Oh, right. I'm going to have to do it both here. Thanks. Okay, so key economic indicators. Let's take kind of a 30,000-foot view here. The Peninsula Borough is one of Alaska's brightest spots in terms of economic growth and population growth. It ranks third among all Alaska borough and census areas in population growth since 2020. That's only behind Haines and the Mat-Su Borough. It ranks fifth in job growth and third in business creation since 2019, pre-COVID, right? And that job creation is only behind Yakutat and Mat-Su. And Yakutat's numbers can be kind of squirrely from year to year as companies come in and out for projects. Its average earnings per job are higher than the Mat-Su Borough, yet housing costs here are lower than Anchorage and the Mat-Su, as well as the statewide average. KPB housing prices have increased more than Anchorage and Mat-Su, as well as the statewide average. And that demand for housing is a pretty good economic indicator, and it reflects economic conditions as well as quality of life factors. I will note, though, that the borough's employment growth did slow down a bit in 2024. Average monthly employment in the borough grew by 1.5% through September. We don't have complete annual numbers yet for 2024. And the statewide average was 1.8%. So fallen just a little bit behind the pace there, but the borough's employment has grown so much in recent years that's not too surprising. So overall, things are going really well in the KPB economy. There's a lot of reasons for optimism that we're hearing about here today, but there's also a few things I think to keep an eye on, which I'll talk more about in this presentation. Let's start by talking about the region's population and its people. The demographics have changed a lot since 1990. You can see the black bars there. That's what your age breakdowns looked like in 1990, and the red bars are what it is today in the borough. Generally, the population's gotten quite a bit older. That's happened across Alaska, as many of you know, but here it's more pronounced. The whole state has gotten 7.6 years older. I think this was back to 1990, but here it's gotten 12, almost 13 years older for the median age. The borough here tends to have fewer children, so you can see the red bar there for the under 20-somethings as well as the 20-somethings. It tends to be less than Anchorage and Mat-Su or the statewide average. And then we tend to see more seniors here. So not too surprising, but I think it's interesting to just see the sort of scale and change over time. Digging down a little bit further, this is what your guys' population change and current population looks like by community. In general, communities near Homer and those on the west side have grown the fastest. Communities in the southern part of the borough or those on the east side have tended to grow slower. And I will also state that Alaska's kind of unique when it comes to demographic and population data. We've probably got the best data of any state, and that's because of the permanent fund dividend. So that allows us to understand from year to year changes in population, what the age profile looks like for those changes. And we can even match those PFD records on residents to the employment records to find out more about what's happening in the labor force. So let's go a little bit deeper. I worked with an Alaska labor economist, Gunnar Schultz, to look at migration in and out of the borough. I'm really excited about these new data queries we came up with because it can tell us a lot about the direction of a local economy and what's happening with it. So, in the case of the KPB, children make up a smaller portion of the population, and seniors tend to make up a larger portion. So what's happening with those populations? Is the borough losing children to out-migration? Are more seniors moving in? I guess the answers to those questions are no, you're actually gaining children in terms of migration, or at least you were up until 2024. So on the top right, that is the net amount of kids moving in and kids moving out, presumably with their parents, right? And so, let's hope. In 2024, that number drops way off, and we've heard a lot about the housing challenges, about maybe workforce shortages because there is so much going on here. This is correlation, not necessarily causation, but you can see also up on the top left, you had actually net out migration in 2024 in total, not just for kids. So, that's maybe a data point where things have gotten so tight that you're not seeing that anymore, or at least not in 2024. Another thing I thought was interesting was there's a lot of turnover, and you see this across Alaska, but nearly 1 in 10 residents were new each year into the borough. So, 1 in 10 people you meet might have just got here, and that's a big opportunity. It's an opportunity to lose them. It's an opportunity to keep them, right? In terms of how much the population of children is growing each year, gaining about 200 new children per year from 2019 to 2023. You actually had more kind of graduating into adulthood, but that was more than offset by the new kids coming in. And hopefully 2024 is just an outlier on that. In terms of seniors, you're gaining about 500 to 700 new seniors per year. And you've got about 550 on average moving in. And then you've got a bunch more people that are kind of graduating to that age class. And people are living longer, so not as many people moving out or down, I guess. And so, yeah, that's the trend, 500 to 700 new seniors. And of course, that triggers huge policy needs, right, for care and housing. So there's more about that in the report. I'm going to talk more about community specific here in a bit, but we'll keep moving. As I said, we can tie these records to employment records and figure out, are you gaining workers? Are you losing workers? What about money? People move, but also money moves. And so when you look at this on average, it jumps around a little bit from year to year, but there is a clear trend of more workers migrating in than are migrating out. The average age of your new workers is about the same as the workers that left. So there's not really a clear trend there, which could be that you've got a lot of seniors coming in, they take some jobs, brings that average age up. So that could just be what's happening there. In terms of the money earned by new workers coming in, that tends to be about 50% higher than the workers who left. Now, a lot of times that's like somebody moving in to fill a job that was vacated by someone leaving, but it's a good sign of a healthy economy that workers coming in are making good wages, generally better than the ones who left. So that's a very good sign, in my opinion. Good. Sorry. So this is the borough economy. As Cassidy said, it's very diverse. These are 2023 figures. We don't have 2024 yet for the whole year. But a few quick things I want to note that I've added here. There's a substantial number of folks that live here and work on the North Slope. So I've tried to estimate and add their employment to this. And also this data primarily comes from those who hold wage and salary jobs and are covered by the UI unemployment insurance system. When you hear economists or news outlets talk about the non-farm payroll, in Alaska it's kind of like the non-seafood payroll or non-fishing payroll because commercial fishermen don't qualify for unemployment insurance. So they're not in the typical employment statistics. But we can make a pretty good estimate about what that employment is. And it's significant in just about every coastal region in Alaska. So I've added that here. But basically, like I said, this is a very diverse economy. You've got your government footprint. Oil and gas is only 10% of the employment, but the wages are high, so that's about 22% of earnings. And you've got healthcare, looming large, tourism, which is going to be jobs largely in the recreation, hospitality, and transportation, as well as retail trade, and probably some of the other private sector industries. That obviously is probably the biggest private sector industry here. So very diverse. And hopefully this data is helpful to help you understand how the local economy fits together, right, industry by industry. Let's go to the next one. So how are things doing overall through time? This is the average monthly employment, again, for those wage and salary workers. And you can see, everywhere dipped in 2020 with the pandemic. But the borough has come back a lot faster and a lot stronger than we've seen elsewhere in Alaska. And so just about 22,000 jobs through Q3 in 2024. So seeing a nice upward trend. And I would also say that I looked at unemployment insurance claims data, and the number of claims generally was falling too, faster than other places in Alaska. So you got fewer people making unemployment claims. It's a sign of a tight economy, really, tight labor market. Let's look at, so we talked about employment, let's look at earnings. This is wage and salary growth over time, annual percentage growth. And you can see that KPB has tended to outpace Alaska overall. Except for this most recent year, the trend has kind of stopped there, but we'll see how it continues. But again, in general, very good trends here. You're beating the statewide average, sometimes by quite a bit. Wages and salaries aren't the only way that people earn money. All income generated within an economy helps it. And so we can look at IRS tax data on residents and compare, that to the Alaska average to get a better sense of, these income sources. With more seniors, it's not surprising that wages and salaries make up a smaller percentage of the borough's total income compared to Alaska overall. But also, KPB residents tend to earn more business earnings, more in pensions and investments. And, just to be clear here, the business earnings includes partnerships, so some of that is going to be passive income. But in general, it's a very good sign to see that your business earnings percentage is high. That means you have probably more business owners, more successful business owners, and that's a good thing from looking at a local economy perspective. Okay, let's talk about housing. Housing here tends to be relatively more affordable. However, as I explained more in the report, the data suggests that the market is probably tighter than most all other places in Alaska. And everybody, everyone in Alaska, or every place in Alaska, and really every place down south is dealing with the housing challenge of high costs or low availability. But as you can see in the chart, new homes tend to be a bit more expensive in the borough versus the Mat-Su. This could be skewed by some more expensive homes being built here in the area, but it's also probably true that new builds on the peninsula are just a little bit more expensive than Mat-Su. But when I look at housing, it's clear there's a need for more of it. That's an easy thing to spot, a hard thing to solve. But when you're looking at what it says about an economy, it's a very good sign. A lot of people want to be here. You just don't, at the moment, have space for them all. Next, let's talk a little bit about the key industries here on the peninsula. We'll start with tourism. Employment in tourism sectors has rebounded substantially since 2020. It's risen to levels well above where it was prior to the pandemic. This is a great sign, and I think really a credit to all those in the tourism industry, as well as all the various groups which work to advertise for people to come to the peninsula. So again, very good trend there. Seeing it continue to grow in 2024. In terms of spending, I looked at sales tax data for key tourism sectors, and not surprisingly, we see this grow quite a bit as well. It dipped a bit during the pandemic, and maybe the reason why that pandemic dip doesn't look as drastic is a lot of this is driven by retail sales, right? So those figures did dip a little bit, but even when you look at accommodations and guiding and transportation, restaurants, it didn't dip as much here in the peninsula as you might have expected. And that's because we had a lot of folks from interior Alaska and Anchorage Mat-Su come down to fish during those years. So that kind of helped take some of this sting out of the pandemic because it wasn't all relying on out-of-state visitors who couldn't come up. Let's talk about mining, and which is, mining is mostly oil and gas here. So employment has been trending down a bit, pretty stable, but really popped up in 2024. It was actually up 23% through quarter three. 2 local gas producers are planning on drilling new wells, so it's likely we'll see employment increase in coming months and into 2026. You can probably add about 250 local refining jobs to these figures. Huge industry here, obviously, stable trend. But I want to talk about, a kind of hidden source of employment. And so when you're looking at the data, and you might say, oh, there's about 1,000 oil and gas jobs here if you include the refineries, but that would miss the folks who live here and work on the North Slope. And that's a little over 1,300 people, which surprised me. I knew it was a fair number, but I didn't know it was that high. That's more direct oil and gas jobs than happen on the KPP Borough itself. It's a very significant source of earnings too. The average North Slope oil and gas job pays about $166,000. And what was also interesting was, even though we're further here from the Ted Stevens Airport, on a per capita basis, you actually have more North Slope oil and gas workers in the Kenai Borough. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The number that both you guys have and Anchorage Mat-Su has dropped over time. Part of that's because the head count on the North Slope is down over the last 5-6 years, but it's fallen more so for Anchorage and Mat-Su as well as Kenai. But I think Kenai has a unique natural advantage in that this is a great place to live if you're working on the North Slope. A little bit shorter commute, and good quality of life, and so it's a very unique natural advantage that other places just don't have. Maybe outside of Anchorage, Mat-Su. Let's talk about construction. So the construction trend, you can see the employment's grown quite a bit, but retreated about 10% in 2024. This sector creates about 1,000 annual jobs in the area. It's not as peaky as I would have assumed it to be. You definitely see more employment in the summer, about 1,100 in 2023. So, there's still a lot of activity going on year-round. Most of the borough's construction workers are employed in specialty trades, 57% there. 31% work in residential or commercial building contractors, and 13% are basically in infrastructure with heavy and civil engineering companies. When we look at this a little bit deeper and kind of trends over time, there's a lot of numbers here, and you can get a copy of this slide deck from Cassie and the staff, so don't worry about memorizing them. But what stood out to me was, even though construction employment is down in the borough, it's up about 10% in the Anchorage and Mat-Su area. Sometimes workers, especially those who move around a fair bit, get coded to an employer's primary area instead of where they're working. So, that's to say that actual construction employment in the borough might not be down as much as it looks like. Also, the declines that we saw in borough construction employment in 2024 was largely driven by fewer jobs for specialty trade workers and building contractors. Infrastructure employment in the Anchorage Mat-Su area was up substantially, and it's very possible that some of these jobs either took place in the borough or were filled by borough residents working elsewhere. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about seafood, the commercial seafood industry. It employed about 2,100 residents in 2023. That includes 832 skippers, 944 crew members, and 327 resident processing workers. Plus, the area has about 13 oyster farms. Now, most of these resident commercial fishermen actually fish in other areas of Alaska. Local fisheries only accounted for 38% of the gross earnings. And that might even be a skosh higher, since some of the halibut and other ground fish tends to happen in waters farther to the west. So, like I said, most of the region's commercial fishing revenue is earned in other areas. But I think the key point here for the borough is that, while yes, of course, what's happening in local commercial fisheries is very important to monitor and develop, but you guys also have exposure to fisheries all over the state, especially salmon fisheries. So whatever's happening in Bristol Bay, Prince William Sound, Southeast, it affects you here as well. As you can see, in terms of like how are things going now, the permit value there, the column with the most recent data, that's down quite a bit. Things are not going well in the seafood industry. But the outlook for 2025 is better. It's looking a little better. Just kind of pick up my note here. We could probably spend the whole day about talking about what's happened and why and where things are going to go from here. But to sum it up, I would say that Alaska seafood has been squeezed very hard by a strong dollar, higher interest rates, and rising costs. Excuse me, I lost my place here. But these rising costs bumped up against consumer weakness. But the forecast for this year is pretty good. Prices seem to be rebounding a lot. Plus, the dollar has weakened a lot in recent weeks. So those are all good things for Alaska fishermen and processing companies. Also, I think the notion of freezing fish in the round, as Northline Seafoods is doing in Bristol Bay and Circle Seafoods is doing in Metlakatla, is a very interesting trend which could drastically reduce costs and leave more revenue to pay better ex-vessel prices. For now, we'll have to wait and see how those companies fare. But kind of something needs to be done to work on the cost side of the equation. Let's dig a little bit more into these migration numbers, and this is for the Kenai area, kind of the broader Kenai City area, which would include Nikiski and Salamatov. You're seeing the number of new residents slow down. Average age of new residents is up a bit. we saw more kids coming in than leaving from 2020 to 2023, but lost children in 2024. We're generally seeing more senior citizen residents since 2019. And you've added more new workers in the last few years from 2020 to 2023, and a lot more new wages than the folks that left. So again, what I just kind of ran through there explains the trends behind what you're seeing with these numbers. Any questions on sort of, what these terms mean or what these numbers mean? Because I don't want to go through them real quick if there's confusion about what you're seeing here. No? Okay. Let's talk about Soldotna area. Again, seeing the number of new residents slow down. Average age of new residents is up a bit. Same thing that we saw in the Kenai area. Net workers earnings is up quite a bit. You're seeing a lot of new workers since 2020. The amount of 65 plus folks coming in, those new PFD residents, that's up pretty dramatically. The number of kids, the number of net new kids fell quite a bit in 2024, but you're still net positive on children. So that's a good thing. If that 49 is negative, then you would be losing children. And you're kind of seeing the percentage of new residents coming into the Soldotna area falling off. It goes from 12.1% to 10.5%. So again, that could suggest that your housing is tighter. Maybe there's not as many jobs in the area. I don't think that's the case in this situation. But I think these numbers help give you some quantifiable metrics behind what you might be feeling or thinking you're seeing in your local economies. Let's look at Homer. So Homer on the top there, you can see that the number of existing PFD residents each year is generally going up. The area is growing, and possibly that's because the area that I'm talking about here is Homer, Diamond Ridge, Fritz Creek, Kachemak City, and Halibut Cove. You're seeing, the new residents came down a little bit in 2024. And also down, I guess, from the few years prior to that. But you're seeing lower percentage of new residents coming in. The age of new residents was up a bit the last few years. It's kind of about stable in 2024. You're gaining kids. You're gaining new kids coming into the Homer area. Not as much as maybe some other areas, but it's still a net positive. And you're definitely gaining a lot more seniors moving into the area, going from 92 on average to 120 in 2024. And again, gaining new workers, quite a few. You're seeing that trend increase, so that's a good sign for the Homer area. Let's look at Seward. So Seward has some opposite trends here from what we've seen. You can see the number of existing PFD residents there at the top. That's come down a bit. The population has contracted. You're seeing less new residents coming in to the Seward area. You're seeing the age of those new residents coming up, so that kind of tells you that retirees are probably moving in general for the folks that are coming in. You're seeing the amount of kids coming down. And actually, there was a net sort of loss of children migrating out over the past 4 years. Still, though, the new workers are making more than the workers who exited. But that difference there at the bottom is not as big as we see in other communities. So, as I kind of say in the report, it's clear from these trends that there probably needs to be more economic development, opportunity happening in this area versus the others. Housing is, a challenge everywhere, probably is in Seward as well. But this just kind of shows you some of the differences between the areas. I wanted to take a stab at an outlook for, various industries coming up here in 2025. There's a couple of big potential infrastructure projects we've heard a lot about today that would dramatically increase employment and activity here on the peninsula. We'll have to see if those get funded. Some are more likely than others, but there's a lot of upside for these big construction and infrastructure projects, obviously. As we kind of work our way down, tourism, I'm cautiously optimistic. It's very hard to predict, and I go back and forth, but right now I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. The air travel hasn't dropped off as much as I thought it would. The cruise ship companies are actually predicting, they're saying they're booked just at the levels they want to be. Bookings are pretty strong for this year for Alaska. So I think you're still going to see a good number of out-of-state residents coming up, out-of-state visitors. We'll have to see what happens with the king salmon restrictions and how that affects fishing tourism. That's something to watch, but there's a really good sockeye forecast. So I think you're going to see a lot of in-state visitors. Things are kind of trending up. On tourism, my final kind of thought there is I think there's probably more downside than upside. If it gains, it's probably not going to gain a ton this year, but I do think we'll see gains in general. For oil and gas, very optimistic. Oil and gas, when you look at the employment projections that the Department of Labor makes, they're projecting that sector to grow the most out of any in Alaska. We've got the new drilling and things happening here on the peninsula. So yeah, I'm very optimistic. There's probably a lot of jobs that need to be filled in oil and gas right now and for the next year plus. Construction, pretty optimistic about that as well. There's certainly a need for housing construction here and commercial as well. There's some big projects looming. We saw that dip a little bit, I think, as a few of the infrastructure projects tailed off. But again, I think we're going to see growth there in construction. It's just going to bump up and down a bit here and there, but in general, I think it's going to go up. Seafood. I think seafood 2025 should be better, but there's big risks. A weak dollar helps. Hopefully that doesn't come back. I think 2025 should be better, but there's just bigger risks out there. And in general, Alaska has to, it gets a premium price. It's got a great reputation, but we got to keep delivering on that because consumers are more strapped and more a little bit weaker than ever. And so we've got to continue to improve quality, cut costs, and that's just a really hard thing to do right now. So again, overall, I'm very optimistic. There's some growing pains that happen anytime you have a really an economy that's growing as strong as it is here. That lump in the carpet could be housing or it could be something else, but it's good problems to have, I would say. So with that, does anybody have any questions for me? All right, well, again, thank you very much for your attention.